Hello everybody,
Hi.
it's Mike Vonbeardingham. Today I'm joined by my very lovely, gorgeous, better...
Oh, thank you.
Got to say it once a year.
Yeah, that's true.
My better half, lovely Carrie Aldridge, who is going to speak to us today about domestic abuse.
I don't know why I found it funny, but it's not. It's definitely... Oh, there's a lot of
That's me
feedback.
having it on my phone just to check it was all working.
I don't need to hear two of you. One of you's bad enough.
Has it gone? It's gone.
Good.
Excellent. Right, so, as you know, the reason for doing these streams is a good friend of ours who's currently living with us went through a situation where, due to a long sort of term mentally abusive relationship, he was made homeless, he lost pretty much everything he had, and we had to go and rescue him, and he's now living with us. So, because stories of male domestic abuse aren't that common, it was a real eye-opener to me. I've known lots of women who've been through domestic abuse, and all the stories are horrible and tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And naively of me, sort of not realising that it happens to men as well, sort of made me realise I think it's time we did a stream where people could come on, men and women, talk about their experiences in domestic violence, or not just violence, domestic abuse, whether it's mental abuse, whether it's physical abuse.
Both.
All the different ramifications of being...
Ramifications?
Not ramifications, ramifications due to what can happen from an abusive relationship. So we had M joined us last week, so kudos to M for starting the ball rolling. Well done. Lovely to have you with us. So Carrie's story, she's got several stories for you. Your I was going to say your choice in men isn't great, and as you can see,
I've made a good choice now.
jury's still out on that one. But yeah, so there's two relationships that we're going to talk about, aren't there?
Mm-hmm.
One that was exceptionally psychotic,
Psychopath, yeah.
psychopathic, with involving self-harm, knives, all sorts of horrible odds and sods, and then also one that was more down a kind of cheating, controlling, possessive route. So, which of those lovely two would you like to start with?
Let's start with the latter one first, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the knives and razor blades and pencil sharpening blades and craft knife blades. And...
Yeah. Okay, so strap in everyone. This is going to be one hell of a ride.
Dion.
Hello, Dion. Right. So, how long ago are we talking here in this relationship?
Oh God, I was 17. So what? 20 years? Jesus, 20 years ago. Yeah. So yeah, that was my first sort of long-term relationship. It was about 6 years.
And how did you two meet?
I think I was at college, and a friend in like the second set, because you had two sets in the class. The higher set was like, the year older, sorry. They were having a party. They just said bring a +1, and my friend on the course invited his cousin, who he was close friends with, and we met that way. We just started talking. Actually, it was my friend who fancied him. I was trying to chat him up on her behalf, and then he said, actually, I like you.
Lucky you.
Yeah, it was great. Great choice. Yeah. So that's how we met at a party.
So what was he like when you first met him? What was, sort of when you found yourself attracted to him, what was it about him that attracted you to him?
He was quite cheeky, quite forward. I guess I was even more insecure than I am now. And I guess I was quite naive. And yeah, just what else did I like about him? Sorry, a bit nervous.
Sure.
I think he was really nice. He was really, really sweet and charming and cheeky and quite confident, and it was that sort of thing that attracted me to him.
So when you started going out, and this is the golden question, what was it like right at the start for you?
It was all right. I suppose that's what they call the honeymoon phase, isn't it? You kind of have the beginnings where it's all like romance. You go out on the dates, and you kind of get to know each other, and you sort of get on quite well, and then you sort of start to develop feelings, and then you miss each other when you don't see them so often. And I suppose being my first long-term relationship, it was I'm very, what's the word, I settle down very quickly. I'm one of those people that can just what's the word, is it monogamous, where you just settle down, and just you can be with one person, like you can see yourself being with them for the rest of your life, kind of thing. And at that point, that's what I thought.
Okay, so that sets the scene.
Mm-hmm.
So now the golden question.
Yeah.
When did you notice things started to change, or you started to feel uncomfortable with things that were happening?
God, it was probably a good couple of years into our relationship. So we'd be out somewhere, and he'd give me this funny look, and it would be like, don't show me up. It would be like a look that would kind of be like, don't embarrass me, don't show me up. Or he'd like kick me under the table and stuff. Especially if I was at his parents', because when I started to relax, I'd throw a few swear words in. Me relaxing for some reason means I swear loads. So I'd get this kind of like kick under the table and that kind of glare that nobody could really pick up. I mean, Dion did eventually. She was just like, oh my God, like, what the hell? And so, yes, there's that's another story of the reactions.
For context, Dion, who is watching, is one of Carrie's oldest friends and has been with Carrie through...
We've had some great experiences with our relationship choices. So we've been through a lot together. So it would start off like that, or he started buying me clothes and saying like, I like this on you, and then if I wore something that he didn't like, it would be like, don't like that, it makes you look fat. And it would start off like that, and he'd say things like, oh, I don't like your makeup like that, because I just started to get into the goth scene. So I'd started to become very attracted to that kind of look, and that Dion was she had like blue and purple hair, braids, and she was really gothy, and I was like, oh, I want to look like that. And so I kind of like got into that aesthetic and the scene, and because I started to gradually get further and further into it, he didn't like that, and he'd say, oh, you look like a drag queen, which, I mean, now if somebody said I look like a drag queen, I'd be really happy. But he was sort of just saying that I was wearing too much makeup, and he didn't like that kind of thing. So
did you look very different when you first met and when you started going out together?
Not really. I mean, he'd sort of I guess I was quite, what do they call it? I wasn't really very chavvy, but I used to wear like the skirts and trouser combo, being really edgy and stuff, and just, I had like, I don't know, just very plain makeup, but I'd still have like brightly coloured eyeshadow and stuff. So it wasn't really, I used to dress really tarty, like short skirts, and I used to be quite brave with my clothing. I'd, not wear tights all the time and things like that, but no, it wasn't really.
So he started to try and change the way you dressed.
Yeah.
Then where did it move on from there?
So there was the like kicking under the table and like glowering at me if I said things that he thought would embarrass him. But he would very often go out with his friends and do a lot of recreational habits, shall we say.
Drugs are bad.
Yeah, and there was I was suffering from really bad anxiety at that point. I'd been diagnosed with, I'd had agoraphobia, and I was diagnosed with GAD, or generalised anxiety disorder, and so I was really struggling being in social environments, and so I didn't drink for a long period, so I saw a lot of use going on, and so that would make my anxiety worse. But yeah,
he'd say you were boring.
Oh yeah, yeah. They'd do the whole thing where like just saying that I was square because I wasn't taking drugs, or I wasn't getting as wasted as they were, basically. So they would be the whole kind of like, they'd just take the piss out of me, basically. And everyone knows I don't like having the piss taken out of me.
Nope.
And if you didn't know, you know now. But yeah, it's that kind of, it was just like, just insinuating I was dull and boring, and because I didn't do any of those things. And for me, it actually was quite anxiety inducing watching people get into different states, and if they were coming up on various substances and they'd change and like hysterically laugh at things. And it was really disturbing to be around that when you were so young, to kind of see people, or if they'd taken something that they shouldn't have, perhaps however it was mixed, they'd have bad reactions to it, and you'd see people crawling around being ill and stuff. It was just really awful. So yeah, it was really it would trigger my anxiety quite a lot. He'd let off like fireworks in bins and stuff like that, and we were being pulled over by the police a lot because we obviously looked like a dodgy lot, and it wasn't fun. And sort of being constantly told you're boring because you're not taking part in all those things or you're not wanting to, it kind of, you start to believe that you're dull and boring and stuff like that. So
what did that make you do? Did it make you sort of retreat into yourself more? Did it?
Quite a lot. I mean, but thankfully Dion was around like a couple of years after me and this person got together. It's really difficult not to say names. But yeah, we...
Hello, Mark, by the way.
We'd sort of all hang out together in groups, and Dion came along and started sort of hanging out with us, and there'd be like the girl crowd, like the girlfriends, and then there'd be the boyfriends, and there was so much drama because some of the mates didn't like the girls because they felt that they were changing their friends, and there'd be so many arguments, it would be ridiculous. And of course they were drinking or taking various substances, so we'd get just horrible abuse, arguments, fights, breaking out. So yeah, it wasn't. Looking back on it now, reflecting on it, it's like it was just so dramatic and ridiculous. But we were really young.
Toxic.
Really toxic. Yeah. I don't know if I've really answered your question, but
it's all right. So we've got the changing how you look. You said he started to become very possessive as well when we talked about this before.
That was the other one.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. He was... I'm just trying to think. Not really, but he also was cheating on me from quite early on in the relationship. He'd be very... he'd sort of accuse me, get frustrated with me because we didn't sleep together. I'm really blunt with things like this, so I apologise. But yeah, if we didn't sleep together more than 5 days a week or something, then that's a huge problem. And he'd put me down, like if he was working, because he worked more hours, he would say things like, well, I've done this, so you should have done that, you should have done the cleaning, you should have done this. And so it was very much like it was, feeling like you're not good enough, or you're not performing enough, or you're
it's just general picking
enough.
Isn't it? That when you pick at somebody enough,
yeah,
it slowly deteriorates their mental state.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think the recreational, substances helped in those matters, no. Really.
Zonti said 971 says, sorry if you mentioned I had to run away. What ages were you at this stage? So
this one I was 17 until about 22, I think, something like that. It was about 5 or 6 years. I can't remember the entire term of the relationship.
And that's quite an important period, isn't it, for somebody? Because you're still at that age, you're finding your feet, you're moving into adulthood, and to constantly sort of be belittled and put down and exposed to kind of this behaviour, especially that sort of makes you shrink away and hide from this kind of thing. So you're not really going to be in that position to sort of flourish into a happy young woman, are you?
No, but I think Dion really helped with that because she did a lot of tarot readings, and she'd say, like, her tarots are so accurate. Like, she'd say, I don't know if any of you are into that sort of thing, but we are. So he would, I'll read that comment in a second, Dion, while I'm on the train of thought. So she'd do tarot readings, and she'd go, right, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And I'd be like, what the hell? Like, it was so accurate. It would say things like, you're avoiding going out because you think that you're not in control of the situation. Like, you prefer to stay at home because you feel safe at home, but the more you avoid going out, so she had things like that. Or she'd tell me that the cards would sort of say certain things about this relationship. And there was one moment where we'd gone out to a goth night, and me and Dion wanted to go somewhere else afterwards, and he wasn't interested. And I think, and Dion started to pick up on his looks at me across the table, or I can't replay it, but he would do certain looks as if to say, I don't want to do this, or you'll do what I say, kind of thing. And at one point Dion flipped the entire table up, and it was a big table, and the drinks just went everywhere, all over our laps, but she was like, I'm not taking this. And so we had this big falling out, and it was really sad actually, because I chose him. I sided with him because I felt that that's what I needed to do. And obviously Dion was right in that, to react that way, because of how he was treating me, and she was getting fed up seeing it.
That's one of the problems I found with a lot of people when you get a partner who, I'm not saying that this is what he did
That's it. Yeah. Sorry.
deliberately, but where they gradually kind of isolate you in a way, and if they can beat you down enough, you start to question your own judgment, you start to question your own beliefs in yourself. And obviously when the boyfriend who you love and everything can be an utter arsehole, and a friend of yours stands up for you, you are in that moment catch-22 where
you don't know who to choose because you love both people.
Yeah, but also if you were to criticise the boyfriend, you are going to pay for
the
it.
repercussions of that,
are going to be horrendous.
Yeah.
So you can't. There's too much at stake for you at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Dion forgave me for that a while ago, but yeah. So as she's saying, he'd get really arsey with me, and then he would just eventually just get me to a point where I'd feel. So basically, what these relationships do is they kind of you get your instinctive feeling starts to get taken over by your doubts. So your instinct would have been like, hang on, that's not right. But now you're kind of like, oh, well, maybe I have done something right. And you start doing this, and it's horrible because that replaces your instinctive gut feeling.
Yeah,
you start to go by that.
You start to feel so much is your fault, and that you're the aggravator in the situation rather than being the actual victim of somebody else. So you mentioned the cheating, and this was one of the biggest damaging things in your relationship, wasn't it? Because as you've said, you've already been diagnosed with
GAD, anxiety disorder.
Yes, so you've had anxiety disorder and agoraphobia as well. And so obviously all of this behaviour is really not helping.
No, and then this is another story, but the stuff with my dad and everything going on with that.
So when did the cheating come into play?
Well, this is interesting because I suspected one person, but that was all covered up between the friends, and we found this out. A friend of mine that I was still in touch with, incidentally, he had a huge row with me for speaking to his parents, and then we stopped talking. So they always used to hang out at the snooker club, and one of the boyfriends or somebody that fancied the girl went to the snooker club, found something that happened between my partner and this girl. He came on his motorbike to my house, crying his eyes out, and I'm like, what the hell's happened? And he just wouldn't say, and then it turns out that he'd caught them. And this was probably a couple of years on into our relationship. We were having difficulties. He'd moved into another place, a house share, while we were trying to sort through our difficulties. And this was around the time where this was happening. But then towards the end, he kept saying he had overtime, and he would go out and stay out the weekend, and it started to get more and more frequent. And then because me and Dion were enjoying going out together as well and spending time with each other, we'd go out to dinner quite a lot. And then there was one point where he called me and said, oh, we need to talk. And the only reason why he was doing that is because I think I started to stand up for myself more, and he didn't like it. He didn't like the fact that I was getting into the goth scene. He didn't like going to gigs, and it was all these things where we were starting to drift apart, whereas I was convenient for him then.
So what made you start to stand up for yourself?
Well, because I think...
What was the trigger?
Probably finding more independence and hanging out with Dion, and her saying, like, look, this is not right. I've noticed this, and this isn't fair on you. He's treating you really badly. And I guess it kind of resurfaced my initial instincts, I guess. And so she confirmed that, and we'd spend a lot of time together talking about it. And she'd be like, because she was like a no nonsense gal, like she'd be like, right, okay, this has got to change. And I've seen her refuse to pay for getting her nails done because she didn't like what they did, and it just those sorts of things, throwing a girl across a bathroom and things like that. Like, just she really was that strength for me.
So you said he'd moved out, and you were trying to work through your problems.
And then this maybe was like a year or two later, where me and Dion hanging out quite a lot, and then he said we needed to talk. I'd noticed he was working quite a lot, doing overtime, and it's sort of, he was getting very emotionally cold and kept sort of saying that we don't get on and all this stuff. And then he went missing for a day, and we were contacting the local authorities, the hospital, see where he was. We were out driving in the van trying to find him, and he drove past us, and we were like, what? And we came home, and he just said, I need to talk to her. So my friends left, and then he just said, I don't love you anymore. And then it transpired after that he was cheating on me, not with one person, but 2 people.
And how did that affect you when you found out that you'd been cheated on?
I was absolutely devastated. You know those like dramatic films where people like crumple to the floor and start sobbing? That was pretty much me. I called Dion straight away, and she just, I think they were in the middle of getting a Chinese, and then she just came back and picked me up and got all my stuff in a suitcase and took me over there. And her partner at the time was saying, you know, is this true, to my then other half, and you know, is it true that you're wanting to break up? And we had our suspicions that there was something going on, because there wouldn't be just this sudden change of heart like that, because, you know, in the beginning you get all these promises like, oh, you know, I'd never do this to you, and I'd always talk to you, and everything's start to get bad, and then of course resentment builds, and they don't, and then they just decide that cheating is the best option. So
the damage that was done from that, when you actually came out of this relationship, because how long was it before you had the relationship with psycho number 2? Well, we'll call it boyfriend number 2, but the psychopath.
So probably about 5 years.
So it's a fair gap. So what were you like in those 5 years?
I had one relationship, I think, in between that time, and I had people that messed me about as well. So I don't know, I wasn't good. I think I'd moved to Chelmsford. I had a really horrible housemate or flatmate who didn't help. She was going through all my stuff. She was using my clothing. She was really intrusive and difficult to live with, and noisy and messy. And so I had that. I was sort of seeing somebody else, and that person was just, I was unhappy with that person, but I think we should never have been together. I think we were just, I don't know.
Different people.
Very different people. I was just very anxious.
Were you, like, for example, with your housemate, and she sort of took advantage of you a lot and things like that? Were you the kind of person still not to stand up for yourself?
Oh yeah, I was not good at confrontation at all.
And do you think that stems from the relationship with number 1?
I think so, yeah. I mean, although I will give her due, she was a nightmare, but she did bring out a sort of a bit more of a bolshier side to me, I guess, and that part I'll give her. And then obviously I made a good friend out of that. I made friends with Jingo, and he's a lovely guy, who I haven't seen for ages, and I made other friends, and Emma as well, who is no more with our friendship. But yeah, I mean, I started to have good experiences again after a few years, but I wasn't great.
Right. So this is where it goes up several gears.
Just slightly, yeah.
Yeah. So number 2, how did you meet?
So Dion's involved in this one as well. Yeah, so we were at a nightclub. It was like a Sky Room. It was in the Sky Rooms in Colchester, which is a alternative event that somebody we know, I think Davina, put on at the Sky Rooms. I'd been single for a while. I think, like, Dion, this is your fault. Actually, no, it's not really. But she pointed out this person and said, "Oh, you know, that person's cute. You know, you just need a bit of fun, and you know, why don't we just go up and dance next to him and see if he responds to that?" And he did, and we got talking, and it was that. So that's how we met.
And what did you think of him when you first met him?
Thought he was alright. It was quite cute, but he told me his age, and I was a bit like, oh, maybe this can't be a really permanent thing. He was quite young, which I don't recommend going out with anybody that's like a lot younger. But you know, my mum's married to somebody quite happily that's 10 years younger than her, so it works for some people. It didn't work for me.
When did you start going out?
not long after we met, he was with somebody, and I was a bit kind of, I don't really like, if that person's with somebody, I shouldn't really talk to them. But, I was quite innocent, and, I didn't say anything, didn't flirt or anything like that, because I knew I was respectful of the fact that that person was in a relationship. And then out of the blue, he just was like, oh, I've split up with this person. Did you want to meet up? And I thought, okay. And again, that was a huge red flag, really, because if they kind of ditched somebody else for you that easily, kind of thing, it's just something quite unsettling. Like, if they could just get rid of somebody that quickly, that person obviously wasn't very important to them. And
so are you around sort of 30 age now, late 20s?
Like, I was 27.
27.
Yeah.
Right, so
it was 11 years ago.
You start going out?
Yeah, we start seeing each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
How was that for you?
Really intense. It was, we'd go out for a drink, and he could never handle his drink either. He was terrible. He'd end up throwing up. Like, he'd have like quite a few, drink too fast, and throw up and just end up in a state. But we'd hang out, and he would like really intensely stare at me, like kind of like this, like sitting across the table and like looking at me. And you know what I'm like with people being a bit too, I can't deal with that after a while. So, it was like that, and it was just it was a bit kind of weird. It was like, and I'd go, what? And he'd go like, oh, but you're so beautiful and you're so this. And it was a bit, looking back on it now, and I don't want to sound like I'm being arrogant in saying this, he was very obsessive. He was very obsessed. I don't know if it was because I was an older lady, that he was just very, just quite, what's the word, like lustful, obsessed kind of thing. Yeah.
Were any of these instant kind of thoughts, obviously you're just going out, you're getting to know each other, you said it's very intense. Are any of these making you, as you say, it made you feel uncomfortable, but at any point did you feel, hang on a minute, maybe this isn't right? Or how did you rationalise his behaviour in your mind?
His age, I guess, that he was younger, or that it's hard really, because he said he told me his feelings very quickly on as well. I think we'd probably only met like 2 or 3 times, and it was like, I love you, and I'm like, that was a really like, whoa, okay, that's and I'd had that in my previous relationship as well. That person had said really quickly, and to me that's a huge red flag. It's like if somebody says they love you after 2 minutes, you're like,
yeah,
okay. So yeah, that was quite unsettling. And also I found out that he was also a recreational user of certain substances, and I said I'm very strict, I'm very against that. I don't want anything to do with that. And so he very quickly was like, oh no, I'll give up, I won't do them anymore. And I was always I started to be a bit suspicious of like him not being entirely truthful to me, but I just thought, oh, it'll be all right. And it's that kind of, yeah, it'll be fine, it'll be okay. And
so we have why am I looking over there? I've got a screen here. I'm being silly. Zionti says, sometimes we have to walk across cowpatch strewn fields, crawl through bramble bushes and wade over stagnant brooks before we find the right road to walk along. There's no map for all this. True. Experiencing some shit myself, I find it very difficult to trust women now, or I guess I should say difficulty trusting my own judgment. Did you experience that? If so, for how long? Yeah,
you kind of, after a while, like I was saying in my first relationship, that person, you had your instincts, and then that person convinced you otherwise, and then you start to think that you're the one at fault. So yeah, I guess I still had that from nearly, what, I was with him at 17 and I was now 27. So yeah, I mean, a good 10 years, maybe longer than that, and probably longer, until I had therapy.
So he's staring at you, he's obsessed with you. Where do we go from there?
I do want to just mention as well, It's also flattering that at the start you felt like the more experienced and control person in the relationship. Ironically, you felt safe and attractive. Yeah, I mean, the beginning of that, it was like, oh, I'm like the more older, experienced person, and this could be.
Well, someone being infatuated, even if it can be, I've known people who, a lot of human beings, we like attention. And if you've got someone who is flattering you and obsessed with
You hold on to that, don't you?
yeah, it can be a very appealing thing until you see further down what it means to be obsessed with someone. Usually bad things happen when obsession happens.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of those bad things.
Oh, God. So it started, I think my friends were... There was a couple of instances, and it's a bit patchy, so bear with. And it's a long road as well. So there was my friend's wedding... and there was a time where I was out with Emma and Jingo, and he started to get really funny and send me weird messages when I was out with my friends. And it would start where like, oh, you know, I'm just not doing very well. And it would be, I don't know if it was in that voice, probably. But yeah, he'd start saying that. And my friends were a bit kind of like, yeah, he's sort of trying to see if you'll go to him. And he'd sort of previously said in the past that he didn't have a very good relationship with his parents, and that you know, he has moments where he feels depressed and anxious about certain things, and he thinks about the past or whatever problems he had with his parents, and he was still living with them at the time. And yeah, so I started to get weird messages when I started to go out, and this is how I noticed it, and how it just started to gradually go downhill. And he'd sort of almost keep texting to kind of keep my attention on him. And if I didn't, he'd call. And if I didn't answer the phone, it would then be like he'd been drinking, he'd got himself to a state where he was saying that he was going to hurt himself. And then it just got worse. So yeah, that was the start of it, where it was like, what? And then my friend said to me when I was out, and she said, if you go now, because I was thinking about going, she goes, if you leave now, that's it. Like, not as in your friendship is over, but that's it. Like, he will have control over you. And I just thought, oh no, it's fine, it'll be fine. And I got to his house. His brother wasn't very happy with me because for some reason he held me responsible for the state his brother was in. He'd cut himself with the glass from the recycling bin. He had vomit all around him, and he'd just, I don't know what he was doing, listening to depressing music and self-harming. But you know, that's how it started. Was
that the first time he did that?
Yeah, that was the first time I remember him doing that. Yeah, so that's the turning up at his house. I'd got a taxi. I'd walked. He was in the sticks somewhere, and I'd left my friends and had to deal with somebody in a complete state. And as I said before, he couldn't handle his alcohol.
What was his response after you came back, after he'd sobered up? What did he say?
I don't know, really. Just, I guess he was glad that I was there, and but yeah, I don't really remember those parts. Just, he'd be, I called it the switch, which is, funnily enough, what you've said that's happened to me, but mine's not as violent. But yeah, like, his mood would suddenly change, and it would be like a thunderstorm. He'd have this horrible expression on his face, like really angry. And it would be like if I got a text from a friend, or if my friend decided to call me, and he'd start, his body language would change. He'd start getting really funny, and then he'd start suggesting that I shouldn't have male friends. But yeah, I mean, when I was in his company, it would be something that would set him off. Very, very often it would be like if I picked up my phone, that would start him off.
Did he seem always ready to find something wrong, or was it certain triggers? So if it was just you and him and nobody else, how did he behave?
Up and down. It could have been fine. It could have been really bad. It would have been something I said. I've said people were attractive before, like somebody on a programme. And he went mental at that, because I dared to find some fictional character in a programme attractive. But he'd like do these little things where he'd start playing those little games where he'd shut himself in a room with a knife. He'd take a knife with him, so he'd get to the point where I'd see him take the knife, and it would be that kind of like dramatic, like looking at me and then like going into the room with it. It's that. It was just that. It just got worse from that.
It's the plan, isn't it? It's the if I do this and she sees me doing this, this is going to make her feel bad. So then she'll try to comfort me. I will gain control of the
I'll
situation.
drop everything. I won't go out. I won't do things that he finds uncomfortable, So, yeah.
It's exactly like a child having a tantrum to get their parents' attention. Or when children if parents don't give their children a lot of attention and sort of praise them when they're good, kids, if they get more attention when they do bad things, to them it's still attention, isn't it? They're still, I've done this and I've got a reaction. And if he's feeling anxious and insecure and everything, he feels out of control. So the only way he can feel in control is by manipulating you, so that you'll probably reassure him. It's just to sate his insecurities.
Oh yeah, and there was many. It just snowballed really. It would be like one night, he decided to tag all of my pictures on Facebook with question marks, and back then it would come up in your friends' news feeds that so and so on their page had done something, and it would come up in mutual friends. But he put question marks on all my pictures that he didn't agree with, and one of them being Pete Steele.
No man on earth can compete with a 7-foot goth with a 10-inch penis.
Yeah, sadly he's very dead now, but but yeah, I mean, it was that kind of, he did that one night, and my friends were like, what the hell's going on? Like, they were messaging me saying, what is up with your other half? Like, why are they doing this? And I was thinking, oh my God. And I just started a new job then as well. And he'd basically started, he'd been cutting himself that night. And I think his mum had texted me or tried to call me to say, like, he's not having a very good time at the moment. And yeah,
Neither am I.
Yeah, he'd cut himself because as a result of what he'd seen on my Facebook, which was crazy. But there you go.
So at these points, were you, again, as we mentioned in the other relationship, are you at this point thinking this is seriously screwed up? I'm not how are you feeling as his partner at that time? Do you still care for him? Are you still in love with him? Or
I don't think it was ever love. I really don't. When I reflect on it now, I think it was just a fling that lasted way longer than it should, and that shouldn't have happened, really. It was just something that should have been casual, and it didn't turn out that way, and it became very, very difficult to get. I felt stuck. Like, I felt really stuck, because I felt like whenever he would harm himself, he'd make me feel responsible for him hurting himself. So therefore I stopped doing these things because I didn't want to trigger him off. So I stopped going out. And then the most upsetting thing was, and like Jess wonders why I reacted so badly to somebody we mutually saw once at a gig. Now said person had emailed me and said, oh, so-and-so's actually got friends, they need to come out and see their friends. And they were sending me snotty messages. They were having a go at me, his friends. Now, what they didn't realise is it was him that had the problem with me going out, and he had to follow me everywhere. It wasn't me stopping him. And I don't know if he had manipulated the situation and made them believe that I was the one, this big tyrant that was stopping him seeing his friends. But I wanted him to see his friends because I wanted to see mine without having any issues. But yeah, I felt stuck. I felt really, really stuck. And I felt like I was responsible for him hurting himself. And he knew that.
It's emotional entrapment, isn't it?
Yeah.
So because if you're in a situation where, say, if you upset someone and they threaten to kill themselves...
yeah, you're responsible for them dying.
Yeah, and again, if you're still in that state where you are mentally beaten down, you still are lacking confidence, you're still you're still questioning yourself, then you're not going to be in a emotional or mental position to be able to say, if you want to kill yourself, go ahead. Because the chances are, for someone who does that much performing arts when it comes to trying to manipulate a situation, the chances are they are not going to do. They're just doing it all for effect. Yeah,
and I wish I had... I was still really naive back then and still believed, I'd still like to see the best in people. And I still kind of thought to myself, stupidly, naively, whatever you say, maybe more naively, that person could change and that I could have been a positive influence on that person. And that I tried to encourage them to go back to college, and I tried to get them a better job, and I tried to sort of help them. And at that point, the relationship with my parents was getting quite strained, because I think they were not happy with me being with this person. And
did they know the full extent of what he'd done, or did they just see the effect it was having on you?
I think my mum knew quite a bit. That there was like one point where I had to, women have to get checked under their bonnets every now and then, and I had to have an appointment, and the name of the doctor was male, and he just went absolutely mad, and I think he'd stayed over at ours, and my mum was sort of saying, yeah, but that could be just the head of that department. It's not necessarily the person that Carrie's going to see. And he just he'd made my life absolute misery, because I had it was actually a cancer scare that I was having investigated. And so I felt really resentful that he was doing that, because I was so scared about potentially having cancer and needing for this to get checked. And then I had my partner who was being really horrible because I could be seeing a male doctor. I just thought, well, no, I'd rather know if I had cancer or not. But yeah, so it was all those things where it started to gradually just get more and more. I was on edge. My mum could see I was really struggling. I would tell her some things, but other things I wouldn't, with the self-harm and stuff like that. I don't think I really gave her a lot of... I didn't want her to worry, because she would have worried a lot.
Because one of the things I found interesting about this particular guy is that with a lot of abusers and controlling people, they tend to create a very different picture to people on the outside than to what they're really doing to people on the inside. Mm-hmm. So a lot of abusers, you may not realise they are abusers, because to everyone else they're very affable. That's the word. Very affable. They're quite pleasant. They might, seem like the life and soul of the party. And then in the background they are beating their partner or abusing them. But the thing with Aidan, he didn't seem...
You just said names. You're not supposed to say names.
You're a twat, dude. But anyway, him... Sorry, that was my bad. Won't happen again.
I did very well at that.
You did very well.
Both people. Anyway, sorry.
But he didn't seem to be able to do that. It just seemed to completely take over him. And whoever he was around, he wouldn't hide it.
Oh, no. Yeah, it was... There was two occasions which sort of stick in my mind. There was one where I'd gone out and I'd been... I was groped by somebody that walked past to go to the toilet. Very common thing, with Sarah Everard. Unfortunately, I've had more encounters with guys doing that than what I haven't had, if that makes sense. So anyway, I was groped on the way to this guy was on the way to the toilet. Said person had seen that and kicked off. And this guy was like ex-army, squaddy, huge. Like he didn't. You don't want to mess with him. And this person I was with had started to take off his belt to go for him. And I remember sort of having my hand on this guy's chest, and I was like, he's just had a few drinks, just leave it. And this guy was like, you could see he was so angry and clearly suffering from some kind of PTSD. And he just said, you're lucky you're there, because I would have killed him. And I had to do that a few times. And the other time was at a party. With Emma's party, and I was talking to a guy. As you do, you get common interests. I get on quite well with blokes, and you sort of get to know somebody, share common ground. And my partner at the time didn't like that, pulled me into one of the spare rooms downstairs and grabbed me so hard that I bruised instantly. Faked an asthma attack. That's another one. Not only the self-harm, he used to fake asthma attacks, and did this fake asthma attack. And basically, my friend at the time, Emma, walked in the room. I think Dylan was there as well. She said, "You're not doing this in my house. Get out." And he got the bottle of Jaeger, left, and then was picked up by the police with superficial wounds. And the police women kept trying to ring me and saying, he wants to speak to you, And I ended up saying to her, look, having been through this experience as a woman, would you want to speak to that person? And she kind of just went, well, no. And yeah, so I mean, it was very, very intense, very scary. It got worse. It was just so unhealthy and toxic. And, you know, he'd do little things where if he was going to work and he knew I was going to go out and see Dion, he'd like shuffle around in his pocket and I'd be like, what are you doing? And he'd drop like a razor blade on the floor or a pencil sharpener blade to make me think that while I was out with my friends enjoying myself, you know, because God forbid I enjoy myself without him, he would make me think that he was going to hurt himself with the blade that he'd got out. And he'd do that all the time. He'd get razor blades out. He'd unscrew the pencil sharpener blades or craft knife blades and do things like that. And it would be really horrible, to be honest.
It's just such a level of bell-endedness, isn't it? It's just...
Yeah.
Oh,
apparently...
Jess said, I knew him before I knew Carrie. He painted out she was the abuser, and I found that hard to believe at the time. People who are that controlling are adept at controlling other people. Shame they can't control themselves. Very true. He was always a little twat. Yes.
Or a big twat now.
Or a big twat. Oh, he's quite a fat twat now, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. If I had known the extent at the time, I would have done more. But I remember telling him that he needed to get help because the relationship wasn't healthy. I will never forget you messaging me before he took your phone that he had locked you in and was hurting you.
Yeah, that was I don't know if you want to get to that part yet, but
well, by this point, as you say, you're still trying to find. Were you still trying to find the best in him and the best in the situation, or were you at the point where you're just like, this is getting dangerous, I need to get out?
It was yes and no. So I'd still focus on, as you do when you're naive and whatnot, and when you've just lost all your confidence, you kind of get to a point where you're like, oh, you know, you focus on the days where it's good, and as my friend said, who's staying with us at the moment, you kind of focus on the one good day that you've had out of a month of bad days, and you think, oh, you know, well, that's got the potential to be fine. And
can you clarify what a good day is? Because we've talked about this before, that when the level of what you consider a good day for somebody who is being abused can literally be a day where a person is not shouting at you, hitting you, or making your life a misery. In that moment, that person can be the best boyfriend in the world just because they're not knocking 7 bells out of you.
I don't even know if there was even, on reflection, there wasn't really a time where we had a really great time together. It was all right, but there was always that kind of thing where you are preparing yourself for
waiting
for the next thing that's gonna trigger him off.
Right, shall we get on to the piece de resistance then?
What, the London thing?
The
one that Dion's talking about.
Yeah, we may as well. Dion's given us the segue.
Right, so we'd gone to Whitby Goth weekend. Had some good times, mostly bad. And yeah, I think the party was just after Whitby, what I'd explained. And then we'd met some friends at Whitby, made some friends, and we were going to meet them in London anyway. That was Marta and Seamus, who aren't on my friends list anymore. How dare you? So we made friends with them, going to meet them in London at a club called Reptile. I was really bad then at money, and I would just use money until my bank just went, no, you can't take any more money out. We got to London and I'd run out of money, so I couldn't do the underground. And I was pretty much financially supporting the both of us really on a very poorly paid job. And so we'd gone to London, had to go back. He was then starting on people in the train carriage because he was so annoyed that we couldn't go to London because, he was expecting me to pay and stuff. And every stop he was threatening to jump onto the train tracks. And it was just to the point where I was like, I'm so tired, I just want to get home. Anyway, we got off the train and he was going, sort of offering me a cigarette, and they go, oh, well, you can't have one because you haven't got any money. And he was just doing this, just taunting me. And then when I got on the bus, I just wanted to get home. And I got on the bus and he was shoving me, he wouldn't let me sit on the seat, and he was shoving me onto the ground. Funnily enough, at that point, nobody wanted to get involved. There was other people on the bus, but they didn't help. We finally got home, and this is where my parents had explicitly said for him not to stay, and I feel really bad for betraying their trust. And we'd got to my parents' house, and then we had this massive argument where as soon as we got in, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen, which was a 12-inch butcher's knife, and he was going to plunge it through his chest. And we had a big fight, like basically me trying to get the knife off of him. There was like scratches and stuff in the countertop, and where I'd grabbed his wrist to get the knife off of him, where he'd previously slashed it himself with the Jaeger bottle, the broken Jaeger bottle, which got him put into a Harlow institute with rubber pencils. I thought that was quite funny. But yeah, so I'd pushed on the wounds, and he was going, "You did this to me. You've done this." And then I was trying to say that I wanted to call the police because he was scaring me, and he shut me out of the porch door at the back, and he wouldn't let me in, and he was like taunting me at the door. And then when I finally got in, I was exhausted because of everything that had gone on. I don't think I contacted my friends that night because I just wanted to go to bed. The worst part of this, after all that, was that he actually tried to have sex with me that night, which after everything that happened, I find very psychotic. And
yeah, business hours are over by that point.
Yeah, I checked out.
Yeah.
And then the next day I'd gone to work. Oh yeah, he was stamping on my feet because he wouldn't let me get into the door. Dion's giving me the information. Yeah, so I was texting Dion, I was texting my friend Emma, and I was like, this has happened last night. Like, I can't believe what's going on. Like, it's been crazy. I think Emma rang the police. I rang Oyster House, which was an organisation that we'd previously got him to go to get analysed with a psychiatrist. And I called this place and I was saying, I wonder if you can help me, etc., etc. And this guy said, just when I was talking to you, I've pulled up his file. And I said, okay. And he said, I could lose my job for this. And this guy would have saved, like, basically saved my life, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have done this, probably. But yeah, he said I could lose my job for this, but when he was analysed or whatever, the psychiatrist said that he uses self-harm as a way of controlling people and other people around him, basically. So you need to get out because he's going to hurt you. And that really made me spin. And then I spoke to my friends. They all drove to the house. I was on my way home. I was terrified. He'd picked up that something had happened. He'd left with the butcher's knife. And I think he'd gone to the corner shop to get a bottle of vodka. He'd left me a suicide note with the blood from, the wrist injury. And it was a really messed up picture of me in heaven reaching down, and he was like under a tree or something, and it had like blood on it.
Oh, he'd drawn you an actual picture and everything.
Oh yeah. And then the police turned up. Stop taunting that. If this is going to cause us trouble. But yeah, so. But yeah, the police had arrived. The dogs, the helicopters. I kept hearing doors slamming from like car doors from the police. Oh yeah, Dion saying he took my phone. I can't remember. This must have been when I got back. Maybe he took my phone. But Dion and her mum turned up. My cousin turned up. Liam, the father of my niece, turned up. And then I just remember the dogs had caught him. And Dion...
Police dogs.
Yeah, the police dogs. The helicopter being really loud, like circling above. And Dion put her hands over my ears and I was absolutely petrified. And yeah, I got he was arrested. His Mum turned up with to get his stuff with the older brother who always hated me. And yeah, it was extremely awkward because it's like, well, I've not done something wrong to your son, you know. He's done it himself. And so yeah, he was arrested, taken to the police station, which happened to be on the same road as where I worked. So what did he do after he got arrested and let out? Walked straight across the road to where I worked. My supervisor said to me, "Oh, your other half's outside," and I just went white as a sheet. All the colour went from my face. Had to tell her what happened. The police took him back off, and then because the parents kicked him out, he was housed at the homeless shelter, also across the road from where I worked. So he had a harassment order, I think, out on him at that time, and I wasn't supposed to talk to him. But what he did was he would wait outside the homeless shelter when I finished work, and he would walk backwards as I was walking forwards to talk to me. Talk to me, talk to me. Why won't you talk to me? Why won't you talk to me? I want to talk to you. And of course, I'm telling him to like go away and stuff like that, and he didn't. And then he used to just stalk me on the way. He found out where I lived because he followed me home one day, and he would just turn up randomly. He'd turn up on his bike, and he'd just tap me on the shoulder and go, "Oh, have you got a light?" As if nothing had happened. He would just constantly turn up. When he found out where I lived, he'd put letters through my door saying if I didn't contact him, he'd kill himself. So yeah, basically suicide notes. He'd turn up at my door all the time. And eventually, because I told the police when this was happening, after the harassment order was issued, that I had spoken to him, they didn't want to know, basically. And they gave me the number for a women's refuge to speak to for advice.
There's kind of an important note there, isn't there, that we talked about. If you do get a restraining order against somebody, or the police, you do get a harassment order, if they say not to speak to that person, do everything you can not to speak to that person, because otherwise it kind of invalidates your case. So please remember that if you are trying to get someone out of your life.
There's some other comments on here
yes,
as well.
there was.
Dion said,
you and me had to lock ourselves in the house, everyone else had left. Zionti said, despite the knowledge that he was a total twat, the police would have to class him as a high-risk missing person, preservation of life and all that. If he had died though, that artwork he left you may have increased in value.
Oh God, yeah. I wouldn't say that he was particularly any sort
of gifted
Picasso.
Artist.
No. Oh God. Well, you see, this is interesting, Jess, because you've never told me all this. So if he was painting me out to be a bad guy, I did have this in my head that he was doing that because people were being arsey with me when I'd go out. And I wondered, I kind of thought that he was making everybody out that I was the bad guy, which makes me laugh because anyone that actually knows me knows how much of a softie I am. So even though I have this like brash bluntness, that shows I respect you more than anything else. But yeah, it's interesting that you say that he was like that, that he was blaming me, and yeah, because you've never told me that before, so that's interesting.
So at what point did he actually start to leave you alone?
Oh my God.
Or what did it take?
Yeah, so I won't go into too much detail, but for some reason, so the harassment warning was issued when he kept leaving the notes through my door, and the police finally listened. So they went over to where he was, because he was actually housed up the road from where I lived. So not only was the homeless shelter opposite where I worked, he was then housed down the road less than 100 metres from where I lived. So you can imagine the anxiety of walking and leaving the house every day. And if it wasn't for my friend Ryan, who I'd just started like hanging out with, him and his then other half, Audrey, who have sadly moved back to France. If it wasn't for Ryan, Ryan would literally just turn up at the right time, and he would actually help me like walk and meet me and
escort you.
Yeah, start escorting me home. But I would see him everywhere because he worked at the like a local carpentry, like the Red Cross Heart Foundation shop. And
apparently Dion said he started calling her non-stop.
Yeah, that was when he was after the party. I think he was put into a mental facility in Harlow, and I think Dion had to change a number or something like that because it was just insane. Like he would call me up screaming and but yeah, it's oh god, it was probably about a year or two, because I saw him a couple of times after that had happened, maybe a year or something like that. I'd seen him again out, and we were all right with each other. We'd made friends, and in a weird way, I just thought maybe I could get some closure by hanging out with him. But then he took advantage of that, and he would turn up at my house. And the last time I saw him was the fact that he'd and I think my friend Mercedes had called the police on him because he'd I just had enough that night. He turned up at my door. He would turn up at my house, and he'd got himself in a fight, and he'd have like a split lip and split eyebrows, and he'd face palm the pavement or something, but blatantly somebody had punched him because he'd been mouthing off probably. And he turned up outside my house, and he was absolutely paralytic. The police were called. They turned up. I heard them taking his details. They didn't want him. Ambulance turned up. They didn't want him. SOS bus turned up and took him home. And that was when he vomited all over my doorstep. And I texted him and said, "Don't you ever do that to me again." And that was it. So I saw him, a couple of years ago, before I'd had my therapy. And I think I couldn't get hold of you at the time. And I spoke to Dion, and he was on the lower deck of the bus, and I was on the upper deck. And he didn't look great. He wasn't good at taking care of himself back then. But yeah, I was really scared even then, and I'd get massively triggered. I'd get horrible body and mind sensations. And if it wasn't for Hannah and the processing, I wouldn't have been able to talk about this now. So I owe a lot of this to my therapist, my EMDR therapist.
And the actual relationship between you and
said person.
It wasn't actually that long, was it?
It was really short. It was about 9 or 10 months.
And that's one of the really scary things.
It does a lot of damage.
Yeah. It doesn't matter whether you've been with a person for years or a short period of time. So much damage can be done to a human being. And
he really did. I was passive aggressive. I had real issues. Sorry, I had real issues with my personal space being anyone near me. I'd get quite frustrated. I actually started when I first got with Michael. I'd be very similar. Like when people were texting, I'm like, "Who's that? Why are they texting you?" And it's quite sad, really, because I didn't want to be that person.
But you had no trust.
No.
Did you?
No. It was very difficult. But yeah.
And the interesting thing, I know from when you were having your therapy and you were sort of on this voyage of discovery about yourself, is that they'd say that when you would, when we'd argue or whether you would, there's something that I would do that would trigger you off. It would literally put you back
to where I was.
Emotionally to how you were in that situation, maybe however many years ago. So
that's really sad. It's really, really sad that somebody can do that. And it's horrible. And I think therapy is a huge, studying it at the moment, it's a huge thing. And I strongly encourage people to have therapy because of how I know that the intervention works. And I know the positive effects that it can have. And I think having got over that, it's a huge thing to accomplish. I feel to get over, and I do have to say thank you to you because you're an amazing partner, and we've never once.
You're after something.
No,
I've got no money.
No, you're not good at compliments, but yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for Michael, I wouldn't have probably had the therapy that I had. I think I've got a lot of security with him. We've never called each other names. We've never used ever.
We've maybe said that things that each of us think might be stupid, but we've never used derogatory terms with each other. We're so brutally honest that probably not a lot of people would be able to handle it.
No, and I think it's sometimes difficult to cope with, and we have little niggly things where I get frustrated, but those things now, through therapy, again, they're a very powerful thing that somebody said to me, or it might have been Lorraine Pascal, who I love. She said that emotions are temporary, and when you feel in that state, and something's upset you, if it's something really minor, you've got to rationalise and say to yourself, it's just going to pass. There's no point in talking about it, because if I'm in that state and I talk to you about it, we're going to argue. So just a lot of the time it's like, just leave it, I'll calm down. And
well, the thing is, when you said about getting the therapy and everything, it took, because of the way Carrie was, obviously from everything she'd been through, when we first met, you were incredibly insecure. You were very, you spent a lot of time on your own, so you knew how you liked things. You had a specific specific way of how life needed to be for you to be even remotely comfortable.
Yeah.
So anything outside of that would trigger you. So it could be, if I happened to be using my phone a lot, or I was getting messages from my friends who are women, it would be a trigger. It would make you pick, and I always felt like there was someone over my shoulder questioning everything I was doing. And
it's like I was waiting to be hurt, basically.
And that it is a defense mechanism. It's if I can basically prove this person is doing this, then I've prepared myself for this. But it took, now if I'd done kind of what Carrie had done when she was going out with these people, and took the more I suppose, what's the word, submissive approach, and just thought, well, maybe she won't be like that in the future, maybe it will get better.
It wouldn't be you.
No, but also it wouldn't have made you get to a point where you see that your actions are having consequences. Because one of the worst things that we can do for people, everybody has issues, everyone has problems, but sometimes by your sort of not, same as when they're talking about what's going on at the moment, by not speaking out and not saying to a person, your behaviour is not acceptable, or your behaviour is damaging,
challenging that behaviour that is causing you issue,
then that person has no incentive
to change.
To look at themselves and think, because the way you were at the time, it had affected relationships with friends, with family, and since you looked at yourself and had your therapy and you've changed, everybody who knows you has said how much you have changed for the positive, and how different you are now as a person.
I ride a motorbike now. Jesus Christ, nobody would have thought that, would you?
But that's the thing. It took that. I know. We're going to get piles sitting here, but that's the thing. It took that pushback from me.
Yeah, because I think ultimately I realised that I might lose you, and you were the one good thing that's come along, really, apart from my friends and my mum and David and stuff. So, I think that was enough for me to be like, right, okay, I could potentially lose the best thing that's ever happened to me. So that gave me that kind of push, and it was CBT, or cognitive behavioural therapy, to start with, and that helped me with like the issues that I had at the time. But EMDR was, I just realised my legs making the camera jiggle. I just realised that I had so much stuff that was still stuck in my head, and I needed to get that out. And I wanted to quickly just make sure that I've covered everything in this.
I'll read some of the comments, because we've had quite a few that we've missed it.
I know, Dion's just left something really lovely as well. That
hang on, I shall quickly go through. So we've had it's from Zionte. Sorry, Al, is that you? That is you, isn't it, Zionte? I think you said it was Al. I'm just going to double check that, because my memory is really terrible. It is Al, yes.
Covered everything.
Yep, so Al said, where are we? It's a shame that these days the community mental health services have been decimated by years of cuts, many more sufferers, as there is nowhere for them to go. Yeah, and I nearly said his name again. Albert Arnold. He was severely mentally unwell.
Yeah, but he wasn't like that with other women. The first ex, I won't say anything about, but I knew them both. I knew the ex and the ex partner after him. And apparently he wasn't like that with her. And then the girl after me, he wasn't like that with.
That's so strange.
And it is bizarre. But I think the first girl was lying, because the scars that this person had in his hands, and because he would not just mutilate, he'd self-harm really violently, and so he had scars in his knuckles, he had fag burns all over him, he had, all sorts of things. It wasn't just glass or craft knives. So I don't think the first person was telling the truth, because he got those while he was with that person.
Right.
But it could have been the parents, because he was very intimidating with his parents, because his mum called the police once when I was there, and she was terrified of him.
That's really sad.
Yeah, and it was sad for the brother as well, who was so young at the time. And it is difficult, but this is the truth. I will say that there's absolutely nothing that I've exaggerated on, or
no,
this is exactly what's happened. So it might not be in exactly the right order, but it's the truth. And some people don't like it.
So we've had was it Atta said, traumas that we have to face, you do mesmerising things, man. She's talking to you or me?
I don't know, but you're a man.
True. Well, apparently so. Nick says, it makes me so happy that you have each other. You compliment each other. Love it. Oh, we miss you, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll have to come and see you when this is all over.
Yeah, we need a nice big Nick cuddle once this is all over.
Yeah.
TL, being 63, I kind of feel fucked with that trust thing. Could I trust again? I don't know. Glad you figured it out, you two.
I think it's never too late. I think
no,
you still want a relationship.
Trust is one of those things. We were talking about this. We won't dwell on this because time's getting on. But I have trust issues, and they have caused problems between us. But it's mainly because if you look at human beings in general, we are incredibly fallible creatures. Mm-hmm. We can be influenced by various things, and I find it very hard to trust a whole species that is very fallible. I trust Carrie as much as I can trust any human being.
I thought you were going to say as much as I can throw, and I was like, you can't throw me.
I trust Carrie as far as I can kick her down the road.
Yeah.
But it still is not 100%. And the thing is, anyone out there, and ask yourself this, because this is an important thing. If you think that you trust your partner 100% and that your relationship is different and that there's complete trust between us, if at any point you feel insecure, jealous, or nervous because your partner is speaking to someone else or anything along those lines, that is because there is an element of distrust. Because if you trusted your partner 100%, you would never feel insecure or jealous, because you feel your partner would never ever do anything. You've got nothing to worry about, and that is a perfectly normal thing, because that's human beings. That's what we are. So it's when it comes to trust, you can trust. There's no harm in, you don't have to trust everyone. If you're too trusting, you wear your heart on your sleeve.
You get screwed over.
Yeah, you get screwed over. We've said this before in various things. The world is not a safe, wonderful place. It is not full of people with good intentions. And for all of you out there who have been abused by people, it is also full of people who prey on the vulnerable. And they are not going to do you any favours. The only thing you can do is hopefully listen to stories from other people, maybe learn how survivors dealt with it, how they managed to get through it, how the therapy they had to help deal with it, how to spot early warning signs.
Yeah, there will be warning signs, and there will, and I would, if we're sort of leaving it at this point, I definitely would suggest getting therapy and getting help for yourself, because otherwise you give out. I gave out clearly an aura of insecurity, unsure of myself. It was easy pickings, really. I'm not saying this is my fault, because nothing what happened was my fault. I could have left it sooner than that, but it was difficult at that time of my life. But yeah, really pay as much attention as you can to the warning signs. If there's something that you feel unsettled by, go with that. Don't just try and convince yourself out of it. That's one of the things I would suggest. If you have to get the police involved, cooperate with them. do what I did, and sort of always maintain relationships with your friends and your family, because that's one of the first things they'll ultimately try and take down as well. So
especially the trying to close you off from other people is, and this is what happened with our friend who's staying with us. But anytime he had female friends or anything, she would kick up a fuss, so he would give them up. This is how him and Carrie lost touch for so long.
Yeah,
was because she basically controlled him and made his life a misery.
Mm-hmm.
And if the more they try and control, if they will try and control what you wear, who you see, how you behave,
Mm-hmm.
if they try and control your finances, this is something that when he will do an interview with us, our friend, and he will talk about that whole kind of thing. You know, all the different elements in your life, they will slowly try and rein in and control until you have got no other options or anywhere to go.
and you lose your identity.
Yeah.
You lose your part of yourself. Stuart is not who I knew, and that's not a
No.
negative trait. That's just because, unfortunately, he's over the years that's changed for him. I do want to quickly just address that Dion said something very sweet, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for what you've said and all the sweet things that Jess has been saying. I have been reading and paying attention to them. So I appreciate everything that people have said, and people for tuning in and giving your support, and yeah, I'm not really sure what
Al's just said, and it's a very valid point. Al said, "Wise words, Mike, but I don't trust anything you say." Good man. Don't trust me as far as you can kick me. Worth mentioning the NCDV again. Anyone suffering or know anyone who is, please Google them. Confidential and free 24-hour help for domestic abuse. A very, very important thing. There are places that you can call. There are refuges.
Yeah.
That you can go.
Not refugees.
No, and even though it, unfortunately for a lot of people, there may be situations where it's very difficult. A lot of the reason is people don't leave these situations because they feel they've got nowhere to go, and the option of going to a refuge.
It's the French version of refuge.
Thank you. Going to one of these places seems like a really horrible thing to have to do. And also, there's also the addiction to everything that you've been going through. That person, they have beat you down so much that you can't feel that you can function without them. So there's that's constantly pulling you back. The manipulation of that person that can keep you coming back. Even when, I think, didn't they say it sometimes takes a certain amount of time for a person to leave someone before they will finally
Yeah,
leave
there are
them.
statistics like that out there,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
It's not a clear cut. It's not a case of, I used to think along the lines of, oh, why don't they just get out? Why don't they just leave? It's not until you realise how badly beaten down a person is, mentally, physically, and they're not in a situation to get out of this. You may as well ask someone who's been locked in a cupboard, who's completely malnourished and can barely move, to run a
You just
marathon.
described yourself.
Yes, to run a marathon. They are not capable of doing it. So hearing all these kind of things, hearing these things years ago sort of woke me up to the other side of what it is for people who go through abuse. Where have we got? Just if I had money, I would give.
Oh, that's been happening. I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
We do still put it up each other on occasions. But yeah, so reach out, keep in touch with friends, keep in touch with family. Do not let yourself be isolated. If you are worried that someone's behaviour, if things don't feel right,
Trust that.
yeah,
That's what
that
it
is usually your gut instinct is usually, depending on who you are, is a very good thing. But when it comes to how you like to be treated, look at how a good one we've talked about before is if you have like this person was treating you, he was controlling you, he was cutting himself. Imagine a friend of yours, like someone you really care about. Maybe it's your daughter, maybe it's your mother. If it's your son, if it's your father, it's a brother, or a friend. If they were going out with someone like that, how would you feel? And that is basically how you should feel too. and it's right to feel like that. Empathy, yeah. Yes, empathy is an ongoing project of mine, something that I'm slowly learning over the years as I discover more of these things.
Dion said if they didn't get so far inside your head, you would never accept their behaviour. They replace your thoughts with their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and she's been there as well. She's had some terrible experiences in relationships, and thankfully we've had each other to survive throughout that, because if we didn't, I think it would be a very different story.
I think one of the greatest things, I mean, I've had relationships where I've been cheated on. I've had relationships where I was manipulated as well.
People tried to change you as well, didn't
Yeah.
they?
Yeah, that worked, didn't it? But it did at the time. That's the weird thing. Even though none of my relationships are on par with what Carrie has been through or what Em experienced, it was its own thing. But the fact that I can look back now and realise what an idiot I was, that I allowed myself to be like that, shows that I've come further.
Hindsight.
Yeah. If you can be embarrassed by how you were behaving when you were in... I'm not saying that you're to blame, because that's not the case at all. But if you can look back at how you behaved and know the points that where you went wrong, where you should have done something different, hopefully you've learnt from that experience to make wiser decisions in the future and get yourself out if you start to notice things are going wrong.
Yeah, but that's it basically.
Pretty much.
Well, we've waffled on for quite some time now, and people are probably bored to death now.
Yeah. No, stay weird, Mike. It's why we love it. It's very deeply ingrained. So there's no getting away from it.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And have empathy for people who are going through this, because it's not their fault. They're not in a position to often make good decisions for themselves, and they may need your help.
Yeah, don't give up on them. Like, if there's any point where they're like, oh, God, they're doing my head in, etc., etc., I'd just keep trying with them, because, the one time they reach out to you and you decide that you can't be arsed with it could be a very penultimate time where...
Yeah. It's very difficult, because watching people make the same mistakes over and over again can be not only depressing, but it can really put a strain on your relationship with your friends, because you don't want to see them going through this. You don't want to see them constantly banging their head against a brick wall and going, why does this hurt? Bang again, bang again. And you're like, why can't you see through this? They're not in a position to see through this.
Yeah.
They're in a place that hopefully you will never have to be in. Right, there's an Andy. Hello, Andy.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello,
I hope this was I hope this was insightful anyway.
Tracy is going to be being interviewed by me as well.
Cool.
So hopefully when she's feeling better, because she was quite out of sorts the last time when we were going to do this. So when you are better, Tracy, we shall do your interview. Next week we have my lovely friend, our lovely friend, Laura Basingthwaite, who...
Sorry.
I can't remember exactly what her job is. It involves teaching, but she's
a drama therapist.
She's a therapist, isn't she?
Yeah.
But she also has dealt with, as part of her job, all the different kind of abuses, and so we're going to be hearing from a more of a professional point of view, from someone who can point out the sort of the behaviours, the characteristics, the patterns that go along with abusers. So that should be really interesting.
Nice contrast.
Yes. And so thank you, Al. Thank you for all the information. Thank you, Carrie, darling. Mwah.
You're going to have lipstick all over your face now. But yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for all your supportive words and being very sweet.
Right, take care, everyone. All the best. I'm going to find where the button is on here to turn this off before we go. There it is. Right, see you later, everyone.
Bye.
See you on the flip side.